Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Taking Chances. On today's episode, I've got I've got a former colleague slash newcoming friend that we're going to have a conversation with. So I got Travis Janko coming in live, owner of GSD Coaching and Recruiting. How you been, Travis? Long time no chat. I feel like this is going to be one of the first podcasts I've done where I know you pretty well, but not as well as we're about to after the next few minutes here. So how's your week been going? What's new, man? What have you been up to?
Yeah, it's been a really good week. Same old thing every day. I think like we discussed a little bit earlier, you just never know what is going to happen. I feel like we live in this pretend world where when we tell people about all the crazy things that happen, nobody actually believes them. Um, so it's really just like each morning, what is the craziest thing that's going to happen today that nobody else will believe unless they're a recruiter? And almost every day tops the last.
I feel that. And previous to this, my mainstay industry that I kind of cut my teeth in was hospitality. So boy, I've been doing this for 30 years. I think I'm just a glutton for punishment of like every day is going to be a little bit different, but also it's going to be very exciting. So Travis, and I know quite a bit about you, man, but I'm excited to dive a little bit into your background. You know, as I was perusing through your LinkedIn, definitely some tidbits kind of filtered out to me that I wasn't aware of, but kind of walk me through like, how did you get into the position you're in today? And then we're going to dive into what it is you exactly do. But I always like to hear the story of what brought us into this chaos world where not every day is the same and there's the craziest stuff that happens.
Yeah, I would say my background is a lot different than most recruiters I know. So I was a sales leader for over 20 years, most of the time in SaaS startups.
Okay.
Some real key points. I went through a $50 million Series C. I went through an IPO, went through a $300 million acquisition and a $3.5 billion acquisition. So really fortunate. Those are the pluses. Obviously, I'm not going to cover all the negatives that happen working for startups, but those are the wins. During that time, the last about 10 years where I was in SaaS startups, I personally hired over about 500 people.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is my first startup was Trulia. Trulia is basically if you're going to buy, sell, or rent a home, you would go to Trulia or Zillow.
Yep.
When I started, it was the Wild West, man. There was 35 of us in the building. There was no specialization. So if you can think of like a startup where there were basketball hoops, kegs, ping pong table, people running around in tank tops and shorts and bare feet, like the whole thing. And
Silicon Valley startup. I got it, man.
it
Yeah,
was
I'm getting into the vibe.
It was. And they hired a bunch of really cool, awesome culture fits, but they didn't necessarily hire great salespeople. So when I came in, and by the way, it was my first startup, and so I remember coming out of training and I talked to Madeline, who's the VP of sales, and I said, hey, I need somebody to build a couple of decks for my sales team. And she literally had tears running down her face as she's laughing. She's like, you didn't catch this? Like, if you need a thing done, you have to do the thing. And that
Do
was
it
my
yourself.
first
Yeah.
step into startup life. I was used to having a person that did the thing, and I was also used to having a recruiting department previously that I would say, here's my needs, and they would go fill those needs.
So you
Um,
kind of went from a pretty insulated workflow to a very exposed workflow. And even as you get into this, Travis, I just wanted to ask you, because knowing your background a little bit, was there something that sparked the interest to go to a startup? Like, I'm just curious if there was something in that foundation of like, I want to hop into a little bit of the craziness.
yeah, I mean, they had reached out to me, and I didn't really know what the craziness was, but we had just recently moved to Denver. And I had
Okay.
been in corporate forever. We lived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Everything was cut and dry. We moved here for my wife's job, and it just made sense. And I'm glad that I did it. It was a leap of faith to dive into a company and make less money for shares. And by the way, those shares really paid off. That's the one that sold for 3.5 billion. So I did
Well,
it
it sounds
backwards.
like,
My
yeah.
first startup was the big one. Then I went down.
So if we're in the recruiting world and they were following that track, the trajectory is not right there, Travis. But I mean, what a home run. So to go from, again, moving from the Midwest, and I'm also someone that lived in the Northeast and kind of similar to your story, completely different, but it was shortly after getting to Denver that kind of my personal business exploded. And I find there's something just very entrenching about those mountains and just the vibe of Colorado in general, that it's just, again, coming from the East Coast, I don't know if you felt this, but it was the most collaborative kind of endeavor, just environment I was ever in, where I feel like really coming from the Northeast, where there's a lot of successful people, but people tend to keep things a little bit closer to the chest, at least in a lot of industries. And when I first got to Colorado, it was the first time where I think it started to evolve me a little bit, because I'm like, wow, everyone's so open and kind of just willing to get work going together. But I still had some of that Northeast lag where I'm like, I don't know if I really trust this, but I think it was a good transition for me as well. So obviously the payoff, I'm assuming, is what led you to go into the other startups, or did you like some of that of not being exposed, or being a little bit more exposed and a little bit more of wearing multiple hats?
Yeah, I loved it. So, I had always been a sales leader, but I was never a project manager, right? When I
Okay.
needed something done, somebody did it. And suddenly my wife is a project manager, program manager. She leads teams all over the world, done it for about 30 years. And suddenly I was put in the spot where I had to build things from scratch. And it was really hard until it wasn't. And then I loved it. But the reason I tell the Trulia story is we had huge growth plans. So there's 35 of us. And they said, hey, in about 3 years, there's going to be about 400 people in this building. And we all laughed. No way. Actually, 3 years later, there was 600 people in our building. We took over the entire building. We literally were doing interviews in tents. There were no offices, so we put a bunch of tents
I
in
love
there,
it.
with a lamp. It was crazy. But anyway, I would talk to the recruiting department and I would say, here's who I need. And then I would do 3 to 5 hours of on-site interviews every day instead of being with my team. And I was interviewing people I didn't want to hire
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
day. But I had to hire some of them. Like that, I had a quota. I had to hire people. I went to the recruiting department no less than 5 times, and they were great at culture. They weren't great at finding somebody to go close deals like I needed. So I decided I'm going to teach myself how to source candidates. I had never done it. I spent 3 months just studying, talking to recruiters, reading, doing all of the things, and fast forward 3 years, out of those 600 people that we had in our building, I personally brought in over 300 of them that I literally went and found myself. I would literally, after work, I would stay up, after my wife would go to bed, I would source for 2 or 3 hours. I would get up at 2 in the morning and source for 3 or 4 hours. And I did this for months and months and months. Never thought to ask them to pay me money for helping place all
It,
these candidates.
Yeah, I'm smiling so
Well,
much because you're so different industries, but our story is so similar, man. I mean, keep going, but it's like, and again, I love this too from knowing you and never really having kind of this depth of conversation, but our stories are very similar, but minus truly and being bought out.
well, so basically, as I worked my way up at Trulia and my teams were crushing it, we figured it out. We went from the Wild West to specialization. We did all the things that we needed to do. Um, our biggest competitor and almost our enemy was Zillow. We would
Okay.
never ever sell or buy to Zillow or buy Zillow. That was a line in the sand. And then suddenly, not long after we went IPO, we purchased two of our number. We purchased the number four, number five company in the space, and then suddenly Zillow bought us for 3.5 billion.
So they
And
crossed the line though. You guys didn't. They took a big step across the line.
they did. I didn't. I wasn't excited about it because I knew that I would probably not have a role there any longer because that's a lot of times what happens.
Acquisitions,
Um,
yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
so a company had reached out to me by the name of Five Stars, a very, very small startup in the customer loyalty space. They had in San Francisco, they had 3 people taking inbound calls, and then they had a few outbound outside salespeople around the US. They reached out and they wanted to build an outbound sales motion. So
Okay.
2 months after our conversation, day one in the Denver office, I'm the only person there. The power is out. I'm building IKEA desks in the dark with a flashlight, closing deals on my cell phone, writing. Yeah, I won't say the next thing. But anyway,
I
I
got
was
you. I
closing
got you. Yeah.
deals and calling the office and having them run them and all those kind of things. We turned that in a year and a half from me to 125 people. in our building. We had to move to another location. We did all the things that they needed us to do. They did end up selling. The pandemic really hurt them because SMB is who they work with. But they
Gotcha.
made it. They sold. The owners are still working for the company. Just a great group of people. But same situation. We hired 3 outside recruiting companies to help us because we had major fast growth. And I fired them after 2 weeks, all of them, because they were sending me 15 to 20 resumes a day of people that I didn't want to talk to. You know the story.
Yeah, I know. I'm shaking. I love hearing these, but it's hard to hear. But it's also why we're both in the same industry. Because I mean, even, and I know you chatted with Clark too, but I love the collaboration that we're all starting to build together a little bit because I know how your firm works. And for the folks that are watching this too, for taking chances, Travis and I have actually had some, I'd say some freelance work together is the easiest way to explain it for the non-recruiter, some splits. So I know the quality of work that Travis has done and your name precedes you for yourself. And I just think in our industry, Travis, too, it's such a low barrier to entry, but to do it very well, very few people do. And you really have to have a lot of concern. You know, I think both for the client and the candidate side. And that's what a lot of people don't understand as much as like, you know, a lot of the coaching that I do for the recruitment companies too is really just talking to them about having the best relationships. Because what I see a lot of content out on LinkedIn is like, oh, you should really stop complaining and you really should have better boundaries with who you want to work with on both sides. But so it sounds like you had a very similar premise there. You went through the 3 recruiter companies, probably did internal. It sounds like success has just been following you, but I'm pretty sure you've been creating that as well. So you're at the start of the pandemic. How do we kind of get into your own business from there? I mean, I see the natural progression, but just curious how that played out for you.
Yeah, and I want to comment on that. A lot of times people say success has followed you, but I don't share all of the other things. It's like
Yeah.
that duck going along the water. It looks like they're just gently floating, but their feet are under there just
Yeah.
going like crazy.
Yeah.
And so, but the same story at 5 stars. I ended up helping place all of those people. I left there to go to another startup that isn't even on my LinkedIn profile because I want the nightmare to go away. Like I said, I did it in reverse. Um,
Gotcha.
but anyway, I had this when I went to this other startup, and I'm going to get to your question how this happened.
No
I
worries. It's
started.
good.
I was like a fractional VP of sales, part time on the weekends. I was helping some growing startups, teaching them how to build the sales motion, teaching them how to coach people, all of those things. And I would spend 1 to 2 months with a client, and then they would need me to help hire people. So I would help them place people. And one day I was driving home, and I had this aha moment. I bet I could ask for money. And I did, right? And so my very first client, very first one was that was actually for recruiting. They said, "What percentage do you charge?" And I said, "I don't know. What do you think?" And they were smart, and I wasn't. And they said 12%. And I did the math in my head, and I'm like, "Yeah, let's go
That's great.
12%."
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Let's do it. I'm all in.
I
Baby.
placed 7 people with them at 12%, knowing what I know now, charging 25%. Anyway, so that was the start of it. But
But it
how
got
I
you going too. And I just love that. I think there's so much I want to almost pull out for people there. Like, because in Travis, just, you know, the nature of the show, taking chances, a lot of what we're trying to do is encourage people to take that chance on themselves. And like, I understand the chaos that you went through, and I'm certain that builds so much confidence in yourself, especially after kind of going from zero and doing it twice. But to just kind of really have the confidence of, hey, I'm just, you know, I have some receipts that are coming in. I'm doing this work and I'm just going to go out and chat with a client. And again, so maybe you lowballed yourself, but so many folks that are out there and listening, the fact that action was just taken is what led you to where you are now. And I think I see so many people just get like paralyzed 6 inches from jumping off the diving board. You know, it's like, just go for it. You've done all the work to climb up and you're about to like have the fun of the splash, but they just tend to, you know, shy away at the last moment there. So lots of respect for you from there. Obviously, you learned a lot that 12% was a little bit of a low ball. So, I mean,
yeah.
where did you kind of go from it there after that?
Well, from there, now I started working 2 full-time jobs. I was full-time VP of sales in a startup, so I was putting in a ton of hours, and I was full-time running my side hustle. So I wasn't sleeping. You know, I was heavily caffeinated. I was stressed, overloaded, and realizing I was making almost 3 times as much in my business as I was in the startup. And
Yeah, same.
so I got to the point, and by the way, it was a really tough place to work. They love shiny object syndrome, or the
Yeah.
pigeon effect. And the pigeon effect is basically, for those of you that don't know, when your founder goes and reads a book, goes to a seminar, talks to somebody, and then comes in and shits all over everybody and says, drop what you're doing, do this new thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it was nonstop always, but I was trying to be really careful and deliberate about when I start my business and making sure, because we have some hefty goals and I didn't want to just drop everything. I had a job. Um,
Yep.
so I had a job and then I didn't. So how did I get into this full time? It was February before COVID, and I had my best month ever. The company I was working for had their best month ever. Like, I literally was on cloud nine. Everything was perfect. I was ready to quit my job. I couldn't handle it anymore, and I couldn't afford to stay there. And then COVID hit, and I suddenly went from a bunch of clients to zero, like literally overnight. I had no clients. I had people that were supposed to get offers that didn't get offers. And the company I worked for was not COVID friendly. So basically, 3 days after COVID, a week after COVID started, I didn't have a job because the entire sales team was let go, and I had zero clients. And so that's pretty much how the business started. It's one of those things where had that not happened, I probably wouldn't be where I am today because I had to reinvent the entire way the business works.
Well, and I love that you said that too, because I think, again, another way of taking a hardship, and again, our story, very similar. We're established a little bit before the pandemic, but the pandemic, and I hate saying this sometimes, but it absolutely exploded my business. But what really happened is what we did day one when everything else wasn't working, and I think for you too, I'm actually very fortunate because if it wasn't for the pandemic, I wouldn't be as in many industries as we're in, but I kind of felt the same way you did. Like we were day one of the pandemic, we had about 6 figures going in offers that were out in hospitality. Day 2 of the pandemic, we realized hospitality was not coming back. Day 4, we went into 5 other industries. And I mean, for us, like looking back, it seemed so intelligent, right? Like I could be on a stage and I could talk about how bright I was to do this. The truth of the matter was our back was on the wall, and I either had to choose to take action or to not. And I'm kind of hearing some of the same things from yours, but I look back on those times like, boy, I'm sorry for all the hardships that everyone went through, but in a really weird way, I'm very fortunate that happened to us. And it really forced me to look at things in a much, much different way.
Exact same here. I had to totally reinvent the business. Major thing, I did some major changes, but the biggest thing was, and you know this, my cold outreach that had worked before actually turned into a really big negative. I was getting some pretty crucial feedback from people I was sending outreach to saying, look, we just went under. What are you thinking? We had to lay everybody off. Like, chill out. You're one of 5 million people now that are recruiters that are reaching out to us. So I changed a lot of my business, but the major thing I changed, I decided that day that I was going to completely cut out cold outreach, 100% to potential clients. I changed my model to partnerships. And so I realized partnerships. So my ICP would be a SaaS startup that is between 2.5 and 10 million annual reoccurring revenue that is mostly founder driven. So very small. I'm impatient. I like to move fast. I don't like working with companies that have to go through legal and all that kind of stuff just because it takes forever. So I thought, who would work with my type of clients? And that would be companies that do like sales training, all those type of things. And so I put my cold outreach campaign reaching out to all of those type of companies, the legit ones. And I built partnerships where now I am their head of recruiting, or I'm just a referral partner. And so now 100% of my business comes from my referral partners that I've built up over the years. No
Well,
cold outreach at all.
see, and I love that too. And this is something where I can't say that we've never done cold outreach, but I would say organically for us, it always feels very inauthentic. And the best relationships we have, I mean, we're signing 3 to 4 clients a month, pretty much from word of mouth and just the organic rate work. And I say this to a lot of people too, but like, we don't try to sell ourselves to anyone. And when we get on a discovery call, we're truthfully trying to do the same thing so our model, we go a little bit more into a subscription model, but I would say it's the same thing as a partnership. We will be transactional until we prove ourselves and the client proves ourselves. We're a little bit different. Where our KPI, our smallest client we want to work with is about 3.5 million and or funded, at that seed level. But predominantly we work with 100 million plus companies. And again, my background from Sun Capital and all the new store openings I've done with Bar Louie, I'm really used to working with the internal teams. But where we're different is, again, we will not have a relationship that's combative with our partner. So like we will go in and we're going to, if it's a massive company, we will usually take like a Western division while they take their Eastern, see which one performs better. We've always won that kind of race. And then what we'll do is kind of come in back on, transition from that transactional fee at 25 to 30% and really say, hey, you're a great partner for us. We want to be with you for the long growth. And we want to establish this relationship for as long as we're both in business. And that's where we kind of come in and just not push the TA wing out, but really just do it more efficiently. And all the things you can do internally and all the tools that we need. So I think it's really, really profound what you did there. But I love hearing all the success that you really focused on the relationships and you're not really worried about selling yourself as much. You're really focused on building those solid partnerships that make sense to you and to what your company does.
Yeah, I would say the partnerships are huge. The other thing is I went against a lot of advice. Actually, I went against almost all advice because I was never trained as a recruiter, right? I taught myself how to do it. But I thought about all the things I didn't like about when I was working with some recruiters who would reach out to me. And so I decided there's certain things I'm not going to do. And so one thing is I never oversell a candidate. I tell them everything I know, and I'm upfront with my client, and I say I'm going to tell them everything. And I never oversell the client on the candidate. I tell them what I know. If they say this isn't a good fit, I'm going to pick my battles, right? If I know this is the person you have to talk to, I'm going to push that. But otherwise, if it's a no, just tell me why it's a no. I'll go switch. Or a lot of recruiters will just push back every time. And I don't do that. I would say, there's a few other things that I feel I do a bit differently. And one of the biggest things, not just working partnerships, but really thinking about who is my perfect client and being able to say no. I have a rule.
That's so important.
If I wouldn't feel comfortable with my children working there, they are not a client. And if I realize as they become a client that they shouldn't be a client, they're no longer a client. And it's just something I stick to. And you and I both know the one time we know better, but we do it, we regret it.
It always burns you. It always does. No failure on that one.
100% of my clients are exclusive. They're always going to be. I stopped doing that other thing because it's too much time and money invested in a hope.
Well, I also think you're doing just as much as we're doing of disrupting the recruitment cycle in the United States, because the cycle's crazy. And again, without getting into too many of my details, people have heard it before, but working in big box America, my experience with recruiters is the same as Travis. And I was never formally trained as a recruiter. What I did, though, is build teams of over 2,500 people that did 150 million in sales that I was responsible for. I think at the end of the day, if more people would just focus on the relationships, and we were talking about this earlier, Travis, like, we have fired, and when I say fired, walked away from a relationship. Again, we always go in with the best intentions, doing the good discovery calls. But if we find out that a client, and it happens sometimes on the candidate side, but if we find out a client is not really doing the A to B as much as they've explained to us, we've walked away from relationships where we have built out clients 6 figures in a month. But at the end of the day, you know this just as well as I do, a few negative experiences for candidates loses our trust. And we need to have trust on both ends. So we're the same way. We don't try to sell. Our whole model is find the best talent for the best opportunity. And what I train my recruiters on, set those folks up for the most honest conversation that can be had and get out of the way. And if you're really passionate that maybe someone saw something wrong, don't die on the sword for the person, but just really encourage that conversation to happen. So, and I love all the successful people I'm talking to in our space too. I like that even if we're in different spaces, we're wired very similar at how we see the opportunities. This leads me into the next one I want to talk to you about, and it's making more sense now with the partnerships, but what a bold thing I can say and ask question. I can't wait to learn more. I think I've learned more about it, but so you're a solopreneur ultimately, and you're a 7-figure one. Walk me through, how are you doing this with marketing and networking? Because I mean, boy, I see some companies at 10 million with 100 employees. I see some companies that are funded like, that startup that maybe have 25 employees, but no revenue, so it's all over the place. But how are you pulling this off and staying consistent, especially through the hard times that we just lived through?
Yeah. So I think I led salespeople for, 20 plus years. I love leading teams, and I don't love leading teams depending on how it's going, right? You have to be a
Yep.
teacher, a psychiatrist, and all of the other things, that goes along with it. So as we started growing our business, I kept watching all these other recruiting firms add more and more and more and more people. And in my mind, what happens if something happens to the economy? And we've seen that recently,
Yep.
where
It's the first ones
these
to go.
large firms are shrinking down a little bit because they grew too fast. So my wife Angie and I decided, what if we could close seven figures a year without hiring anybody? And it took us a while, a lot of iterations. First off, she has a full-time job and a side hustle, but she's also my chief of staff.
Okay.
So we did this whiteboarding session, and this is probably going to help. It was an entire day whiteboarding session, and it was so I was getting stressed. I was overworked. I wasn't sleeping much. You're an
Yeah.
entrepreneur. You feel like you have to just work a lot,
Nonstop. Hmm.
nonstop, and do everything. So we wrote down everything that happens in the business. And by the way, it was a lot. It was way too much. Two sides of the board.
I can just imagine that a full day of whiteboard because it's like an onion. Like, oh my God, throw another layer up. There's too many layers
Yeah.
up here after a while.
So step one, what's everything we do in the business? Step two is we're going to go through in what is mission critical. In other words, if this doesn't happen, the business will fail.
Okay.
So those became green, right? Then we went through, is this something that needs to be done, but it's not mission critical? Those became yellow. And then the red ones were, are these even important? Are they just things that are happening?
Busy
Or
work.
are
Yeah, yeah,
they,
yeah.
are they busy work? And so we eliminated like a whole side of the board of things that I was doing that I didn't need to do. Then we went back through and I thought, what am I amazing at? What are the things that I'm the best at that are mission critical for the business? And then what are the things that I'm great at that are mission critical for the business that I love doing? So we came
I
up
love
with
this. Yeah.
a small box of things that I would do. And then what we decided is what are all the mission critical things that I'm not great at that I don't like that Angie can take over? Because she's a
Okay.
project manager. She loves sending invoices and doing all those things and chasing the money and the things I don't like doing. So we gave her her tasks. I have my tasks. Then the next step was own your time because the time was owning me, right? I was always
Yeah.
working. So fast forward, I don't take a meeting before 9 a.m. I don't take a meeting after 2 p.m. Like it, I shouldn't say that. You can't book on my calendar
I got you. Yeah, I know
before.
you. Yeah, yeah.
I may change, but I don't take a call after 4 at all. Literally, if my phone rings and it's 100 times from the same person, I've told them I don't take calls after 4. Like
Yeah.
that's my time. I'm
But you've
not
already
going to
set
take
that
a call.
boundary too, like in the discovery and the relationship piece, and I think that's so important. I don't want to interrupt you there, but there's so much you're saying right now, Travis, that I want to extrapolate on. So,
For sure. Then the next thing is time blockage. So what I was doing is I was going Monday morning. My very first call is at 8 a.m. and it's with a potential SDR candidate, sales development rep candidate.
yep, yep.
And I hang up, and immediately I'm 3 minutes late for a potential client. So then I hang up with the potential client, but before I can make any notes, now I'm talking to somebody for a director of sales role. And I hang up, and now I'm talking to a partner, and it was a mess. So
Yep.
I've blocked my things by days and by times.
I love block
So
schedules.
each day I'm talking to the same person about the same thing, as much as possible, right? And so
Well, and
for
it
the
builds
most,
consistent.
yeah,
Sorry to interrupt. It builds consistency in not only like your workflow, but your mindset. Because I know how hard that is too. If you're going from, especially if you're in multiple industries, SDR, client call, HR call, I'm 2 minutes late. You're kind of chasing your tail the entire day, and you're never fully present for anything
yeah,
that's happening, right? You're always kind of like, I got to get this note down, I got to get this, and you're listening over here. So the power of block scheduling is phenomenal, though. So it sounds
it
like it
is.
worked out well for you.
The final thing I'll say on that is I couldn't, and everybody on this call knows, I couldn't hit 7 figures a year with just myself and Angie. Like, if I'm only working the hours that I'm working and I still want to enjoy life. So I decided to really start working strategically with partnerships like you, where basically I found people who were better at roles, certain roles that I'm not as good at. For instance, if it's a director of sales role, I'm working that all day long. I'm excited and
100.
interested to talk to a director of sales. If it's a director of marketing, that's not really my specialty, but I know somebody that it is their specialty, so I'll just do a split with them, right? Or
Yep.
if my bandwidth is just too much, then I'll just do a split with somebody. And a good example is I can place SDRs all day long, but it doesn't excite me to have that conversation.
I completely understand that.
And so I'm going to have somebody else work on that one. And so that's pretty much like a whole big jumble thing put together, but that's how we do it. I mean, we're closing. I think last month we placed 12 candidates,
That's huge, man.
and that was
That's
with taking a vacation,
and how long were you on vacation for that time?
a week.
So I mean, for 3 weeks. 3 weeks
Yeah.
closing 12 candidates at 25% in tech is, I mean, anyone that's a recruiter knows exactly what that means. It's a very happy month. We'll say that,
Yeah.
especially if you're a solopreneur. And look, so many things that you said there, and I kind of want to get into this a little bit, but the power of block scheduling is something I've talked about on the show several times with several different people, even an MMA fighter, like an MMA fighter who's in the Bellator right now, because we've had all kinds of guests, but the power of block scheduling for him to put himself to have enough income to also be able to put himself for training, to be able to be present where he's at. And I like what you did there. You really, you and your wife, you focused on your passions. So you us as business owners, there's going to be aspects of our business that we just tend to gravitate away from because we're not as excited about it.
Yeah.
And typically we want to try to train to delegate our opportunities. Otherwise they're going to become a huge weight on us. But I love that you just broke it down and really saw, okay, what's mission critical first? Because I think, even when Clark and I talked last week, I'll get on my recruiters pretty consistently, not to say get on them, but it's very easy in our space to get yourself busy and think that you've accomplished something, but you can look back and you've really done nothing. So we're constantly trying to do that too, of rip down our workflow, take a shot. I'm actually going to do what you just said with the whiteboard and really go over some AORs before the beginning of the year, because I think this is, us with more team members. Every time I add a team member, there's an argument that we should probably do this task because we've got more hands in the pot. So, I mean, Travis, this has been a phenomenal conversation with you so far, and I know that we've done some splits together and stuff like this. Where do you see yourself going with this, though? Like, I'm just curious. Like, what is your vision now with the career that you've had? Like, where do you see yourself trying to end up? Because it feels like you're really disrupting the recruitment industry, and you're doing it in a way that, even though that we're doing something similar, I've never really heard it explained the way you are. So I'm kind of profound about that, but I'm really curious to see what is your end game goal for all this.
Yeah, so two things. I've done a lot of coaching with recruiters on the side. Like, I've been on some of Clark's trainings trying to help. I've never charged anybody for it. I don't necessarily want to do that, but I want to keep going the way we're going for at least the next 3 to 5 years. I've had, as you have, had people offer to purchase the company.
Yeah.
I don't think it wouldn't make sense because I don't have a reoccurring revenue model in today's world.
Yeah.
So the value just wouldn't, I'm not going to get a 7X, right? That's
Yeah.
not going to happen.
Especially
Plus,
coming from the SaaS world,
yeah, plus I love what I'm doing. But 3 to 5 years, but there's something that I'm going to add in, which is a new SaaS model, and it's called sourcing as a service. And
Okay.
so I have a team of 7 who help me do sourcing when I need to. They're offshore folks. They're really good, but it took me years to find the right people and to train them the right way to do the right things. They don't call anybody. They don't talk to anybody. I just teach them who I want. They go find who I want. They put them on a spreadsheet. I say yes or no. If it's a yes, they introduce them, and then I go on with the process. And there's some recruiters who are amazing at bringing on new clients. There's some recruiters who are amazing at sourcing candidates. And there's some recruiters who are amazing at screening candidates. And there's some recruiters who are great at the project management piece, but most aren't great at all of those things.
At all of those, I agree.
Yeah. And like, project management is the special, like, that's what I love. I like spinning the plates, keeping the plates spinning.
Yep.
But there are so many recruiters that I've talked to that say, I don't know how to go find a great candidate, but I know how to screen them for sales BS. So can you help me find somebody? So I've experimented with this idea and it's done really, really well. And so I'm not ready yet because I don't have enough bandwidth, but 3 to 5 years, I plan on starting a reoccurring revenue model where I will be doing sourcing as a service.
Well, and I love that too because I think in similar again, I'm at my offshore in Romania, and again, technically not offshore in the European Union, but that I have also been traveling around trying to build a sourcing team. And again, Travis, the difference, I guess, in our background, I still love the people development side. I know you love the people development, but I love growing my team. So I think where I came from big operations. I've tried to outsource for the sourcing so many times and got our fingers burned or just had hit and misses. And really what we've kind of been able to do now is just establish a really good foundation of 6 sourcers based out of Romania that just crush it for us. But again, we learned so much from that too, Travis, because when we opened up, especially during the pandemic, when we had, more hands on deck than we probably needed. But that's really when I started to change our business model a little bit. What I mean by that is we were a full desk recruitment, everyone before that, because it was, I'll be honest, it was working, but I don't think I thought through the plan enough. And the pandemic really made us kind of look at, okay, what are we doing here? What is the best way? How can we monetize and maximize all of our productivity with what we got left? And we just kind of divided and conquered. But the biggest thing that I want to talk to you about today too is, and I can't wait to read it, but you've just got a brand new book out. I mean, 7-figure solopreneur, exited a couple of startup concepts before. I just love how active you are. But talk to me about you of all people. So just hit me with it, I guess.
Here's the book. So it's been a goal. I always wanted to write a book. I started doing it several years ago, but never really got anywhere. What I do is I find myself, even though I'm not hiring salespeople, I find myself coaching and teaching the CEOs and the entrepreneurs that I'm working with. Even though they're only bringing me on to do recruiting, I feel like I become their advisor. And all of the teachings that I was giving to them and then upcoming recruiters, I thought I could put this into a book. But the book is a story. So it's the story of how did I go from having 2 full-time jobs to no jobs to building a 7-figure business, and then a lot of teachings and trainings and crazy stories in between. It was, honestly, Shaun, it was really designed as a business card. So when I go to conferences, I can, hand them out to potential clients. I didn't expect to sell. I thought, maybe I'll sell 10 to friends and family or something like that. I never thought in a month and a half I would have, several hundred of them sold. I haven't done any marketing. I haven't done any advertising for it. Aside from a post on LinkedIn or what have you, and a pop-up on my website, which is killer. But that's a whole nother story. But yeah, the book really is kind of the journey, and it's not one of those where you're reading it and you have to take notes and write down. It's a 3-hour read, and you can read it in 2 sittings. It's very educational without you realizing that it's very educational. So it's just, it also tells a little bit about my childhood, which is crazy. I won't ruin it. Most people don't put childhood in their books, but you'll understand. I don't want to spoil it for you.
Well, 'cause I'm picking up a copy of it, so don't spoil it for me. But it just sounds interesting because I'm in the same process of basically telling the same story, right? Not Travis's story, but the story about how I got started. And it's, I feel you there. It's a complex thing, and it's something that I definitely want to have out to memorialize. But as we were living through the pandemic, I just think, and especially what you did too, like just to hear that the growth you've had through such hardships, and it just takes me back to a lot of, I was baptized kind of in business by my physical training, my sports background and martial arts. And I think that level of discipline has always just kind of stuck with me. So when times have got tough, it's like, at least I have a system that's been established where I have trust in myself, and where I tend to see a lot of people in the world get paralyzed by fear. And I've worked with you. I've always seen you as a very stoic kind of example of humanity. And I mean that with the utmost compliment. So I think like as you reach out and knowing a lot about Travis, having worked with Travis before, I can't wait to read that book. But for the guests that watch Taking Chances, I mean, it sounds like that is an exact book, an exact story that's on Taking Chances. So how can someone find that book right now, Travis? I know it doesn't sound like you're advertising it yet, but on your website, is it on Amazon yet? I mean, we're going to leave the links for everything you got, but
it's on Amazon. So you can go on Amazon and purchase it there. It's so I did it purely through Amazon, so I don't have to have a whole garage full of books. So they print and ship.
Okay, beautiful.
Cool. You can get the Kindle version. So it's on Amazon, number one. What was the other question? I'm sorry.
Is there any other place where they could purchase it? I know from the website, maybe where you want to have them purchase
Yeah,
it from.
you can go to my website. I have a description of it on there. It's gsd-coach.com. You can find it there. Super cool story about the book. So I have one partnership where almost all of my clients come from. It is the largest SaaS coaching company in the world. And it took years, but I've become their exclusive go-to sales recruiter. So these are SaaS founders that are building their company up, and when it's time to hire, then I kind of dive in. So I've done a lot of webinars for this company. I've done a lot of in-person trainings for these guys, and so my webinars go in their library, and I never know who's going to be watching them. And I was working with a new client 2 weeks ago, and right after he signed the agreement, we get on the call to do the final onboarding to make sure that I can make sure we're on the right page, right?
Yep.
And I said, can you walk me through what your interview process looks like? He held up my book and he said, I'm using the 4-step interview process that is in your book, which is really cool.
I know, and I'm having some of those same feelings for myself, but I just understand what that's like too, because you haven't been, I don't want to speak for you, but knowing you a little bit, you haven't been putting out a ton of content in perpetual. I mean, like, 'cause you're not trying to cold sell to anyone. This is one of your first real kind of big endeavors for content going out.
It is, aside from LinkedIn. So
Yeah.
I figured out the LinkedIn game a ways back. I used to get 200, 300, 400, 500, 800,000 likes, and I was all excited, and it got me zero. Because I was talking to the wrong audience about the wrong things. And so now I have a post that goes out every single day. My content is built out for the next 2 months already ahead of time. It's just dropped in Canva and it just goes. I pick one day a week for 2 hours where I just sit down and write content. That's it.
Love it.
But that's where a lot of my leads come from. It's amazing how many times I'll talk to somebody, a candidate, and they'll say, hundreds of recruiters reach out to me, but I followed you for the last 2 years. So that's why I'm talking to you. Or a client will say, I had a client 2 months ago say, hey, we're excited to be on board with you. Please don't make us one of your stories. And I'm like, what do you mean? Oh, we've been following you on LinkedIn. We don't want to be one of your stories. I'm like, that's so cool. We want to be connected. So that's about the content.
I vibe with you on that too, because so this has been an endeavor for me where it was, so my background was actually in hospitality, but most of my content, I was a personal trainer and a skydiver and a certified climber. So a lot of my content that I was comfy putting out was all about the fitness. So I kind of had this like transposed two versions of Shaun, which ultimately they're the same version of me, but just building that confidence to kind of go from the fitness world to speak about what it is I do more here. But for everyone out there listening too, I mean, everyone's got a voice, right? I'm a big believer in 2 ears, one mouth for a reason, but there's so much bad content out there right now just to be regurgitated. And I think I would like to encourage more folks that are doing great to really explain the process more, right? And I think if people just start to do exactly what Travis did with the book of kind of giving it behind the scenes of like, maybe I'm not a guru at what I'm doing, but here's how I got to a 7-figure company. Here's how I've fixed X, Y, Z. And I think, the thing that blows my mind is I wish the podcast had more downloads. We're not marketing it yet. We have thousands of downloads on some. But what blows my mind, Travis, is every discovery call I've been on since we launched this 9 months ago, candidates and clients reference it to me. And it's like, so awesome. People are always watching. And I feel that too. And it's the first couple of times I almost felt offended. And I'm like, wait, this is why I'm doing this, But I'm like, what do you mean you've heard about me before, So fantastic conversation today, Travis. Number one, I can't wait to get back to Colorado and just link up back with you again in person. But
for sure.
I know you've got so many endeavors going on, but just leave our guests with a couple other things. It sounds like you can be a great recruiter partner. And I know you do a lot of coaching. I don't think I covered too much on that. So I just want to give you a few minutes to talk to the guests and let everyone know how to find you and what it is that you're really maximizing your specialty in.
Yeah, well, you can catch me on LinkedIn or you can go to my website, gsd-coach.com. I don't really do much coaching any longer, just because of the bandwidth. I mean, I do it unintentionally, right?
Yeah, you're coaching me right now, Travis.
It's part of what I do, but what I would say is, whether you read my book or you read another book or whatever it is you do, figure out what your end game is and just work backwards on how to get there. You're basically gamifying it backwards. and you visualize where you want to be, what you want to do. I have a vision board up there. I have all the things. I know where I want to go and what I want to do, but don't try too hard. So you've done this and I've done this. I've watched recruiters trying so hard to close a client or to close a candidate. I don't get paid if a candidate gets an interview. Like,
Yeah.
nobody pays me because I get an interview. And I don't get paid by clients if I overclose them, because that's the bad thing too. Just figure out what it is that you're going to do, figure out where you're passionate about, and focus on that, and just go and push. Everybody here who is like, there's no way I could work the schedule that you're working. And I'm making it sound simple. I work more than I'm letting on. Think about all the stuff you do in a day that you shouldn't be doing, or you don't need to do, or it's unnecessary.
That's a lot.
I remember watching one of my salespeople who was really, really struggling several years ago. And I said, I'm just going to sit and watch you all day. I'm literally going to sit right here and just watch what you do. And she probably refreshed LinkedIn and Facebook 100 times per hour. And she didn't even know that she was doing it.
Subconscious. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, that was probably 15 minutes an hour. I just helped her gain back. And then she checked her email every 5 minutes, right? List little things where, if we think about what we do for the day, we can eliminate a lot of the things that aren't important.
I mean, so boil down what is really important to the individual, eliminate the distraction, and excuse my language, but we like to swear, and get the fuck after it. I mean, for lack of a better term, the things I'm taking away from Travis are the same things I've talked to almost all guests. Nothing happens with just planning. It takes some action. And again, if you have some fear that goes with it, it probably means you're doing the right kind of endeavor. So Travis, I could talk to you for 2 to 3 hours. I definitely want to have you back on. For all the fans out there too, this is the last 3 episodes that we've had is a slow rollout to the new B2B podcast that we're going to be releasing in January. So Travis, your wealth of knowledge, I really want to talk to you a couple seconds we get offline, because that whiteboard scenario is something I need to do. For all my guests out there, please go check out Travis's LinkedIn profile. A wealth of knowledge, great coaching me right now for free, even if he says he doesn't do it still. So I thank you for being on, man, and we'll catch you next time, guys.